Hello, everyone. So, welcome to the Octo Finals of Winter Holidays Open 2020. My name is Orgo. I'll be a chair for this round. I would request the panelists to kindly introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Arda. I'm here as a wing. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Gabriel. I'm from Croatian Debate Society, and I will also be judging this debate as a panelist. Good luck.
All right, thank you so much. Now, may I please request the proposition team to introduce themselves one by one in terms of your speaker order, and also kindly send it to me through chat as well. Thank you. Proposition team.
Hello, my name is Arthur Drow, and I will be proposition first and the final focus speaker for today's debate.
Hi guys, I'm Bowen Duan, and I'll be taking care of the proposition second speaker role. Good luck.
Hi, I'm Rachel Fay. I'm proposition third speaker.
Thank you so much. The opposition team, please. Team opposition.
Oh, hi, I'm the first speaker for Edward Gal.
Hi, I'm a second speaker for side opposition. I'm Ramon Kassam, and also be doing the reply.
Hi, I'm Ankita Biswas. I'll be the third speaker for side opposition, sorry.
All right, okay, thank you so much. So just before you start speaking, I would kindly request you to also mention what would be the preferred way of accepting points of information, whether you would want it to be voiced out or whether you would want it to be proposed through or a chat or not, all right, okay? So on the motion, this House believes that votes cast by youth should have more weightage in national elections. I hope all the debaters and my panelists are prepared. So without further ado, may I please invite the first proposition speaker to open the floor. Here.
I would like my POI, am I audible?
Yes, you are, yeah.
Yeah, I would like my POIs to be voiced out. And with that, allow me to start my time. Today is a world where we live in xenophobia, where we live in places with racism, where we live in places with sexism. And today is also a world where the young are striving to fight for a future that they truly want. So in this context, we tell our opponents that we want to fight for the impacts on the long run, because it is then are the young striving to fight for a world, striving to vote for a world, striving for democracy that truly affects the decisions. And it is a world where in the future, they become leaders that make the changes to our society. Now, allow me to move on to the definition. What is youth? Allow us to define what youth is. Youth, we as typically defined, is a person in the age of adolescence or near maturity. Now, youth in this context should not be defined as the age below the legal voting age. Take an example: if the legal voting age then what youth is starting from 18 to 8 years after that. Why 8 years? Because 8 years is the time it takes a person to have a fixed political mindset. And why is that so important to justify in today's debate? Because both sides of today's debate are going to make their impacts between those times of those young people. Why is this so? This is because they have a fixed political they don't have a fixed political mindset. Imagine you are working 50 years in a far right wing society. Your thoughts are not going to be so easily changed through voting, through speeches. But if you are young and you say just graduated or just in work, your thoughts are easy to fluctuate and for you to decide what is truly right and what path you want to go down through your life. And that is what we define youth as. Now, today is not the debate, whereas the proposition, we want to shift the debate to encouraging minor votes. No, as I said before, today's debate is focused from the age to the legal age requirement of voting to 8 years after that. Moving on to the model, as I said in my context, we are looking at long-term effects there, because take the bill and the laws in America, for example, on both houses of the Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. If they both vote for the bill to become law, it has to go to the President of the United States. In other words, this is a very complex process that can take, say, 4 years, 8 years, 10 years, 12 years. Therefore, we would shift the impacts of this debate to a long-term process. And in order for the House to win today's debate, they would have to prove that in the long run, those who are young are voting for a world that they truly want to live in. Now, allow me to introduce our contention we have today. I will go through the contentions of the show. I will justify the importance of votes that should be more weighted with the youth. I will also go to political involvement required in the youth, and my second speaker will go through the importance of not having a fixed mindset. Now, where's my first contention? It talks about moral principles. I would justify the importance of why we should have a higher weighting vote to the youth. Now, with this, we argue today that we want for the added up votes of the youth to be at an equilibrium to those who are considered typically as non-youth. Let me give an example just like this. If I have 1,000 people who are considered as the youth and 10,000 people who are considered not youth, then the ratio to the vote of effectiveness is then 10 to 1. Moving on, look, today's debate happens in a democratic world because that is where voting happens. What democracy fundamentally is democracy needs to represent the voice of every single individual. And simply by saying that I have an equal vote to you is not enough, because we see minorities and minorities, not only that they lack in power to influence other groups, other races, more are so minorities in the lack of, say, population. If this certain minorities have that many, like 2 times as much people as us, doesn't mean that they should have more voice and more power over us. That is not so. In comparative, say, if in our case, the youth has less population than those of the non-youth, should they have less power and the status quo? No, that is not so. So go ahead with your POI.
Do you honestly believe that the entire block of youth people should have as much power as the entire block of the rest of the country?
Well, it's a question of whether we believe that are the youth going to live in a world that they truly want, or are the people like who are 80 years old in Senate are going to live in a world that they want for the younger people? No, that's a completely arbitrary question, because I argued in today's context that we are voting for a world where we truly want change. And if you're 80-year-old white man sitting in the Senate, you're not going to vote for a world that is you are going to vote for a world that is xenophobic, and that's a world that most people don't want. And moving on to my contentions. So why is it so important that we need to give the power to youth? Because as I said, repeated many times in today's debate, it takes long time for a vote to be established. For instance, if I say Obamacare is established in, say, 1 month's time, then that care might be removed by another Senate debate or another law in the span of 2 years. In other words, if there's no delay in long-term effect, then my vote is completely arbitrary to today's debate, because I'm not making an impact to myself nor to society. So we anticipate that our opponents are also going to say that the youth might not be smart enough or wise enough to understand what's truly right and truly wrong. But that's just simply arguing the fundamental morals of what is right and what is wrong. It is precisely the fact that they do not know what they want in their future careers that we argue that their votes are more significant in life, because they have a fluctuating mindset, which is where we create the most change and where we create the impacts. Now, because of this, we need to make the adjustments to mechanisms in the vote, which then support a setup in turn, giving more rights and more political voice to those who are considered to be the youth. Move on to my second contention, political involvement. We see that in the status quo, the youth, especially those who are who just barely graduated, finding a job, are typically not involved in politics. Why is this? Is this simply because of time? Is this simply because that they need to find a job, that they don't have the extra time to look into politics? No, it's simply because that they don't have the confidence to believe in themselves, that their votes are being taken seriously. Now we need to promote that. We need to promote this apathy and, say, political involvement. Why does this apathy exist in the first place? Now let's look at the basic principles of voting. If person A, say, votes a vote that is equivalent to the power of person B, then they negate each other's vote. So in the end, the deciding vote is the vote that occurs from one person that overwhelms the entire other party. Now, if I am, say, far on the right wing and have for 30 years, I'm convinced that I want what I want, then it's completely arbitrary for me to vote, despite that perhaps the opposing party is going to have an incredible amount of votes. But if I am at the fluctuating stage, which I am considered as the youth, it is important for my vote to be detrimental in the voting system. Therefore, we would give a more weighted vote to the youth, simply because they can create and establish more change, which incentivizes them to vote in and of itself. Now we come back to the context, where we argue that votes are simply important because this is what matters in the long run. Say I establish an impact today, it gets erased tomorrow. I'm not establishing anything. And so virtually to today's debate, it is crucial that we argue that the youth lives in the world that they're making with their votes. And the vote I make today are the decisions and the role that affects me 20 years after. And those impacts on today's debate is why we should focus on the vote and why we should promote political involvement. Because it is those votes that most justify today's debate and create the most impacts on both sides. And with that, I would like to end my first speech. Thank you.
All right, the House acknowledges the first proposition speaker. The speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 37 seconds. Now, may I please invite the first opposition speaker to take the floor? Here.
Oh, sorry. Everyone can hear me, right?
Yes, you're audible. Yeah.
Okay. 3 things in this speech. First, our stance and burden as opposition. Second, some refutation. And then lastly, my constructive. I'm going to talk about the principle as well as voter apathy in this first speech. First, in terms of our stance, we would still strive to increase youth voter turnout through things like campaigns as well as increase accessibility, but we would not weigh their votes more than others for reasons that I'll talk about later. What are our burdens? So what do we have to prove on our side in order to win this debate? We are going to prove in this debate that we ultimately are the only side to uphold democracy through 3 paths. First, we're going to talk about how we actually uphold the principle of democracy, and then we're going to talk about how we practically uphold democracy through voter apathy as well as educated voting base. Moving on to refutation then. The first argument or first idea that we hear from proposition is essentially the importance of youth votes. They tell us that youth votes are extremely important, and they do not get many votes because they're outvoted or outweighed by the rest of the population. And they tell us that the youth are a minority, and they want to give more votes to this to this population. First of all, they never prove why. They also talk about how there's more political involvement. Political involvement requires youth, and currently there is no such thing. First of all, they never prove why there's no political involvement from youth in the status quo, and they never prove why there needs to be more weighted votes for the youth. They simply tell us that youth are a minority, and they also tells things that youth do not want to vote because they don't have confidence. They never prove why. Inherently, it is justified to actually give these individuals votes. But second of all, I think we actually uphold the importance of youth votes on our side as well, given that we also have, given that we're still giving them votes and we still have the upholding of principles of democracy. But second of all, we would challenge their notion that they actually give more power to youth and they uphold democracy, because they actually are the ones who are basically discriminating against the rest of the population because they're making the rest of the population votes less impactful. They're actually stripping away voting from other individuals. I think that deals with the majority of their case, but the rest of my refutation will be vastly integrated. No, thank you. First argument then on the principle. The thesis of this argument is principles of democracy and equality are most salient and must not be breached, even when practically beneficial. Democracy is a form of government in which citizens have the authority and right to choose their government through voting in a representative. This is crucial because many states around the world are democratic and recognize the vote of all their citizens. Given this, why is giving youth more weight in national elections principally unjust? First of all, recognize that democracy inherently means that people are able to choose their government equally. In a modern context, it means that every citizen of a democracy has an equal vote, i.e. 1 vote per person. When you give youth a larger weight in elections, you're giving them more votes than others that are not in this youth demographic. This is unjust for the same reason that women and minorities not having the right to vote is unjust, because a certain demographic, i.e. males or white individuals, have a vote and therefore more weight in elections. This is something proposition has to essentially support, given that they're giving a certain demographic more votes and more weight in election over others. But furthermore, I think democracy is supposed to give power to the people, but that can apply if we give an asymmetrical amount of power to different demographics. Basically, if we want to implement this motion, it doesn't actually show what the population wants if votes are weighted unequally. But second, the second reason why this is unjust is because within society, there are certain individuals and circumstances that influence your decisions. For instance, your parents and the society you live in influences your behavior as well as your political stance. This is because if you grow up in a household and a society that idolizes or generally supports a certain political party, you are likely to absorb those political opinions. I'll take you in a second. That occurs because individuals are very malleable at a young age due to being naive and inexperienced. This is why there are cities and towns in the US across the globe that almost entirely vote for the same politician and party every election. There are also pressures that come from these same parents and society to vote for a certain party because of these strong support that occurs. The issue with this then is the fact that youth are not necessarily voting for themselves and casting their own ballot for their own opinion to be heard. It's often that youth are a proxy of their parents and society. Essentially, in many instances, proposition is giving demographics multiple votes for children. Like these non-youth demographics more votes, which is unjust for the same reason. That is, different individuals have more weight in elections, which is analogous to white men having more weight in elections over women and minorities. Even if this also exists on our side, that's like influence, notice that they exacerbate this on proposition, given that youth are given more weight in elections, which means that a vote influenced by someone else is much more impactful. So they do not have the representation they want, and it is principally unjust based on democracy and equality. Note that this also clashes with their first two arguments insofar as they do not actually give youth more representation, etc. I'll take the POI.
Okay, you have explained in your speech that the youth are being influenced by the other population. If we as the proposition team tell you that these influences are usually telling the youth that, oh, because you are young, your political influence does not matter, what will the youth do?
Okay, I think it's unlikely that youth are going to tell other youth individuals that their political influence doesn't matter. We can see that youth individuals are actually the most like active inside the political sphere. That's why we have things like social movements that are headed by youth. But I generally don't think that POI is like really relevant to this. So the reason why this argument is significant is that this principle stands regardless of the practical outcomes proposition would like to point out, because proposition also never truly fulfills their goal, because votes on their side are often unrepresentative. Second argument then on voter apathy. The thesis is that individuals who do not get weight in national elections are less likely to vote because their vote is less impactful. We think that people who are not part of the youth age group will feel and know that their vote is less important because the weight of other votes are increased. I.e., when the weight of other votes are increased and the pool of all like votes are higher, it's like the unhighly weighted votes are proportionally weighed less. Why is this? When a group knows that their votes do not matter as much because they're weighed differently, they're unlikely to think that their vote can make a difference, resulting in an apathetic mindset towards the voting system. Note that voter apathy is already an issue within the status quo, where 1/3 of the populations in democracy often do not vote because they think that their vote does not matter. This is only exacerbated by the fact that non-youth voters literally have a less say in democracy as well as less of a vote. Why is this problematic? I think the first problem is that polls will only have one demographic, or at the very least, the polls will be dominated by that one demographic, i.e. the youth. What's the problem? I think the ideologies as well as social and political views of the youth are often different than those of older generations because of generational differences. This is unjust in principle as well as on the practical, because it is very difficult for these non-youth voters to get the political change they need. That is extremely harmful insofar as there are above 26-year-old voters that cannot get the laws and policies they need for better quality of life as well as well-being. This also clashes with proposition's argument, where they say that like we have to prioritize the youth because they're our future. That just because they're our future doesn't mean we should discredit the votes that we have from like older generations that are not youth. But furthermore, I think politicians are also more likely to cater to youth demographics because they have the most weight and influence in their elections. Even if non-youth voters do turn up to elections and cast their ballots, it is weighed less, which means that proposition cannot mitigate this argument by telling us that. So what's important to remember is the fact that proposition cannot get proper representation of democracy when they give youth votes more weight in national elections because they take away voting power from the rest of the population. That's unjust. Proud to oppose.
All right, that was acknowledges the speech from the first opposition speaker. The speaker spoke for 8 minutes and 16 seconds. Now, may I please invite the second proposition speaker to take the floor here.
Right. Am I audible?
Yes,
everybody?
you are perfectly audible. Yep.
Just give me a second. Let me set up my timer. My time starts now. Well, we as a proposition believes that the opposition team has already lost today's debate because simply that they keep contradicting themselves. Before I move on to my substantial argument, first, let me engage with my opinions with some rebuttals. Let's see what they have provided us with. They have basically three arguments. First, they say that because the youth are minority, they don't deserve to get more votes. And second, they say that while on their side of the house, they provide more equal votes while we don't have equal votes. And they also say that the youth isn't representative because they're always pressured by the other group. At last, they also say that the other groups are going to have political apathy because the youth votes are being more weight. Now, several layers of rebuttal on their points. First, on youth being minority doesn't mean that they are more votes. We have told you in our first speech that because the votes, as you already mentioned, are influenced by the people around them. The people around them always have this already existing stereotype that is extremely detrimental to the youth, basically saying that because you are young, because you are less experienced than us, your votes are worth less than us. The people around the youth, as you already said, will keep influencing the youth by basically saying that, oh, your vote doesn't matter, you don't have any political justification whatsoever, and therefore you shouldn't vote. Therefore, because of these influence, we have already told you that the youth should be prioritized, because only in our side of the house, only when we promote the youth being heard, in this case, the voice of the youth can truly be heard. Now, on equal votes, just like what I mentioned above, in your world, you're actually promoting inequality where the youth are always influenced by the people around them, basically saying that, oh, you don't deserve to vote because you're inexperienced. However, in our world, we are actually maximizing the vote of the youth and the voice of the youth being heard because they're provided with better opportunities and less stereotypical bias from the influencers. Now, moving on to the next point. They also said that the youth isn't representative because they are influenced. I have engaged with this in my several layers of rebuttal. We have told you again and again that by prioritizing the voice of the youth, they're actually going to be more representative. Now, on political apathy, it's really a matter of who do we prioritize in this debate. In our opponent's role, they're basically providing what they call the other group, the group that is not youth. And in our world, we're basically telling you that we should prioritize youth. Why do we prioritize youth? Three layers of analysis. First, we will explain to you in our third contention that the youth decisions are more valid. And second, we provide to you that the youth are going to make better political decisions. And third, as I have explained again and again and again in my speech, the youth are simply being ignored by the political masses and their voice deserve to be heard. Now, moving on to my substantive argument. We as a proposition team believe that the youth are having more political weightage not only is morally justified and results in more political involvement, but also the youth are better at decision making because they have better mindsets. Three layers of analysis on this point. First, youth are more adapted and familiar with the status quo. Second, the youth are better. And third, the youth are more audacious and passionate, and therefore they're going to lead to more political and social progress. I'll take your point.
Are you actually trying to say that most of the voter base shouldn't be voting?
I'm not saying that the most of the voter base should not be voting. I'm simply saying that the youth being ignored and being a very important group, as I will explain in my later contention, should be prioritized and should be given more voice, being that they're simply being oppressed, discriminated, and ignored in the status quo on which your side of the house is promoting. Now, moving on to my substantial argument. First, youth are being more adapted and familiar with the status quo. Youth are born in the age of globalization and tech advancements. They grow up looking at global news, learning about global views and economy using iPads and MacBooks. We believe that the youth are intrinsically more adapted to the globalized world. The vast majority of the population, on the other hand, does not have as much exposure to new tech or the globalized world as they're born in a totally different world, a world older than us, a world fundamentally different from our world, the globalized world. The impact of this is that because the youth are more used to the globalized world and they have much better, they deal with new technology and the new economy much better, they're going to provide much better political policy. They're going to have much better votes, leading to a much better world with policies that are very adapted to the status quo. For example, in a world where a father has been living in the same country for the entirety of his life, been working for that country for the entirety of his life, and been in the education system for the entirety of his life, all he has exposed to is but the culture and the information in that nation, leave alone of all the censoring in the media of that country. However, the son and the daughter of this father goes to global universities, they read global news, they understand several languages, they simply have much more exposure to the globalization. They're going to provide much better policies as a result, and therefore benefit the politics and the society better generally as substantially. Therefore, we tell you that the youth are more adapted and familiar to the status quo than the older generations, in which they are going to be much less xenophobic and open-minded and embracing of other cultures, and therefore further globalization. They're going to provide much better policy. Second layer of analysis, the youth
PY?
are more not accepted. As the world goes through waves and waves of economic boosts throughout the years, the youth are going to get much more educated than the older ones. Two layers of analysis. First, on education. The youth are provided with much better education opportunities. They have the opportunities and the abilities to go to the best global universities in the world. They are going to receive much more personalized education system with, for example, class choices and academic streaming, such as, for example, the IB curriculum provides, and outside of class enrichment. And they're also going to have activities such as debate that is also going to enrich their education. The fact that we are all sitting here and debating means that as the group of youth, we have better education opportunities. We as a proposition team tell you that somebody from 20 years ago simply do not have the access, the fundamental access to, for example,
PY?
schools, much personal education system, and outside of class enrichment, such as debating. Therefore, we tell you that the youth, being much more educated than the older generations, they're going to have a much more comprehensive and deep political thinking. And therefore, as a result, they're going to come up with much more nuanced political decisions, combining all the educated factors above. They're going to have critical thinking. They're going to have much more mature decisions, and therefore much better political engagement. They're simply going to have much more beautiful ideas. Third layer of analysis. As you have already explained in your speech and in your POI, the youth are likely going to be more active than the other population. This means that they're also being more audacious and passionate about politics, and this is going to lead to political and social progress. Even if the two layers of analysis that I provided above don't hold true, we tell you that the youth are going to provide much more political mobility and engagement. Well, the youth are not being frustrated by the politics yet, and therefore they're going to generate a lot of new ideas and a lot of new policies. Whether these policies being right or wrong, good or bad for society, there's still going to be much more debate provided in your world, in which everybody are simply conservative and pragmatic and simply going for the same idea over and over again with simple tribal affiliation instead of actually democracy and debate. And therefore, we tell you that because the youth are justified to be prioritized, because the youth are being ignored in the status quo, and because the youth are much more adapted and familiar to the status quo and can make much better decisions, we as a proposition have never ever been prouder to propose. Thank you very much.
All right, that was acknowledges the speech from the second proposition speaker. The speaker spoke for 8 minutes and 30 seconds. Now, may I please invite the second opposition speaker to take the floor?
All right, can everyone hear me properly?
Yes, you're perfectly audible.
Perfect. Okay. I'll take verbal POIs, please. When side proposition hurts the actor they claim is most important, the youth themselves have already won this debate. Nevertheless, a few things in the speech for you today. Firstly, I'll be doing some rebuttal. Secondly, some reconstruction. And thirdly, on to the third point on our side about pressure to vote. So let's move on to some rebuttal. They give you three main points on their side. Firstly, they talk about justification. Basically, they told you that it's justified to allow the youth to vote. They said that the youth should have as much power as the rest of the world, or as the rest of the country, sorry. But we don't think that this is justified because we can't equate the youth to the rest of the population. When you have 20% of the population that's youth and 80% that's not, it's unfair to give 20% the same power as 80%. We think this is completely unjustified, completely undemocratic. But secondly, we don't see why people over 26 shouldn't have as much impact on long-term issues, because they tell you that you should have this power because the future will impact them. But we think that these elections, one, impact right now, and two, that Everyone is impacted by long-term issues. That's just how long-term works. People over 26 aren't just going to drop dead right now, right? They're going to be impacted in the long term as well. But lastly, even if you don't buy that, we cannot sacrifice principles of democracy. This is what my first speaker is trying to tell you, that we cannot sacrifice democracy just to give the youth more power. They haven't really proved why this is justified. Secondly, they tell you about political involvement, tell you that youth are like not involved in the political sphere, tell you there's voter apathy. And sure, this is true, but this is true for the entire population, right? But we think that it actually gets worse on their side of the house, as my partner proves to you in his point, where it actually creates voter apathy of the majority of the population. So instead of the entire population thinking, oh, I don't want to vote, you have the 20% maybe saying, oh, I want to vote, and the 80% not wanting to vote at all because they don't have as much power. They're not feeling they're being represented in a democracy at all. We don't think that this is okay. We think it creates less political involvement as a whole. But secondly, my partner already tells you in his speech, or you actually have other mechanisms to create political involvement in the youth, where politicians can actually reach out to them. This is what happens in the status quo, where politicians go to youth and say like, look, you are important to us. We want you to vote for us. This is just what happens. They try to involve them. But also they give you no impact to this, because even if we buy all of this, they just tell you that like youth aren't involved. They don't tell you why this matters. And maybe it's intuitive, but they haven't explained this to us. So we don't think that this actually has any impact, even if you buy any of their analysis. Now, thirdly, they tell you about fixed mindset. They tell you that youth are better equipped to like vote. Youth are better equipped to participate in democracy because old people are like racist and have conservative beliefs. First of all, we think it's a pretty big generalization that old people are generally racist and xenophobic. We don't think that it's okay to base an entire point on a generalization like that. We just don't think that's fair. And they also say that conservatives are like not a good belief. I think then when they said that like liberal beliefs are always good, progressive beliefs are always good, they can't stand for that because we can't automatically claim like in this debate that progressives are ultimately better. We don't think that's fair. We don't think that's a good like statement to make. But even if we buy their generalizations, even if we buy that unfair characterization, there's still a couple of responses to this. So firstly, we can say that youth are also somewhat unexperienced compared to the rest of the base, because they spent less time in the political sphere, whereas everybody else has spent more time in the political sphere, spent more time voting, involved in politics. And also that, youth can be easily heavily influenced. No, thank you. They even conceded this in their speech when they tell you that youth are easily influenced by their parents, by their friends, and things like this. But secondly, when they tell you this whole point about like how like youth have more access to computers and Google and whatever, this is again a mischaracterization, because not all youth have computers, not all youth have access to these things. There's like huge internet access problems in the entire world. There's huge poverty problems in the entire world. This is again a huge mischaracterization that they cannot stand for. But lastly, we think that even if we buy that youth are the best population to vote, we still don't support it, because again, democracy is of the utmost importance in a democratic nation. That is what this house is. We are in democratic nations. We cannot sacrifice democracy just to give one population that side proposition thinks is somehow better more of a voice. Okay, so with their points taken down, we're going to move on to some reconstruction. My partner gives you 2 great points in his speech. Firstly, about the principle of democracy. It tells you how it's of the utmost importance in a democracy. We cannot sacrifice democracy. We have to give everyone one vote. We have to make everyone's vote equal. And this is the principle of democracy. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Basically, what they tell you as well, we want youth to have more influence. I think I've already taken this down. It's really simple. Like, this is the issue. We don't want youth to have more influence. We want them to have as much influence as everyone else, because they're ultimately another voter, another person that the government, another person, like just another voter. They are just another citizen. Everyone should have the same power because we are in a democracy. They did not talk about they did not actually attack my partner's mechanism. They did not attack its analysis. They just responded with their point that doesn't even clash with it very well. But even if you buy that, we think this influence can be very easily exploited, even if it is to have influence. No, thank you. We think that's one easily exploited. It's obviously not going to be good influence, because parents and friends can just force them to vote for someone else. I think my partner proved this too in his point. But secondly, under voter apathy, they said that my partner said that people will feel their votes don't matter because youth are worth more. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And what they tell you under their side is that we are prioritizing the wrong group on our side, where we are prioritizing the majority over the minority. And even if that's true, which it's not, we're actually just giving everyone equal voice. We think that it's better to give the majority a voice than the minority, because that's how a democracy works. But we don't think that's true. We're actually just giving everyone the same voice. That's just how it works. We shouldn't prioritize any group in a democratic system. So let's move on to my constructive. So I'm going to talk about pressure to vote, and first a little bit of characterization, because we think that when you're participating in democracy, you're expected to vote. And yes, some people do not, but it is an expectation, because voting is one of the most important processes in a democracy. And so under this motion, we think that people will be forced to vote by everyone around them. We don't think that this is okay. Why is this? Because when your vote is worth more, then you become more powerful in your country. Well, it's also like cupcakes and rainbows on their side. It creates real impacts on young people because they feel internally forced to vote because it's extra power, because it's extra responsibility. But secondly, I think it'll also cause the older people in their life, so parents and older friends, to pressure them into voting because their vote is basically worthless compared to these young people. I think, hey, we cannot squander this opportunity. They cannot throw away this power, and so attempt to force them to vote, peer and familiar pressure, etc. Side proposition may say this is never effective, but peer pressure has and always will be an effective tool to get people to do things. They actually literally said this in their speech, that youth are easily influenced. So if everyone in your life is telling you to vote, you're probably going to cave. They can't claim people will hold out against an entire society. Those internal and external pressure will ultimately result in these people feeling obligated to vote, not actually wanting to. But why is this bad? Because side prop seems to tell us that more people voting is always good, no matter how genuine. But this is simply untrue, because what's the impact of this? Well, it affects the quality of the vote. When someone feels pressured to do anything they don't want to, they won't do it well. If someone was forced to judge or debate at this tournament, they probably wouldn't put a whole lot of effort into it. That's pretty self-explanatory. So in a voting scenario, this looks like not doing proper research, not actually knowing which party you want to vote for, and simply walking in and casting a vote for whichever one you want. Now, this may sound ridiculous, but this is exactly what happens in the status quo. People simply don't care about political issues enough to research them, even if they're not feeling pressured to do something. If you look at the UK referendum on Brexit, most simply voted because, well, why not? And the most searched question on Google the day after in the UK was, what is the EU? And the UK is one of the most developed democracies in the world. So it's pretty obvious that most people don't care enough to research as it is. But when you literally force people to vote, pressure them until they feel like they absolutely have to, those people are going to do even less research, care even less, and be even less educated about political matters. So this leads to two things. Firstly, it further attacks democracy because one of its pillars is having an educated voting base. Yeah, I'll take the POA.
Do you admit the point that the youth currently is more educated than the older generations?
No, I don't, because everyone receives education. We think that everyone will receive some sort of education. Everyone will have some sort of influence because everyone is educated. I mean, not everyone is educated, but basically all populations have about the same amount of average educational level. That's basically, that's what we believe on our side of the house, where everyone has some sort of education. So secondly, we also think that we don't want to exacerbate the effects of this uneducated voting base, because we do agree that we have this on our side, but it actually gets much worse on their side. And simply at an individual level, they already face a lot of pressure. Peer pressure, familiar pressure, societal pressure already exists in all situations, and youth already face this every single day. So an entire society is saying, hey, you need to get out and vote. We don't care if you want to or not. It's another burden they have to carry around. We think that this pressure can harm them mentally when you have double or triple or however much the amount of responsibility as the average voter in your country. But on our side of the house, you have more of a choice as whether to vote or not, because people won't pressure you. And so youth do vote will be well educated. Those that don't want to, we should let them make that decision. Because we believe we should not pressure the youth, we are so proud to oppose.
All right, thank you so much. The House acknowledges the second opposition speaker. One kind advice to all the speakers to kindly have a track of your timing, because the POI was asked during the predicted time, all right? So please kindly make sure that you're following it through in terms of your tracking your timing, all right? I'll try to indicate the timing through hand signals. Okay, so after 1 minute, I'll be indicating 1, and after 7 minutes, I'll be indicating a 7, right? Okay, so please kindly ensure that you are following it through accordingly, all right? Thank you so much. Okay, so the speaker spoke for 8 minutes and 31 seconds. Now, may I please invite the third proposition speaker to take the floor here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yeah, please go ahead. Thank you.
My time starts in 3, 2, 1. Dear panel, Bernie Sanders is 77. The Speaker of the House is 80. Senate Majority Leader currently is 78. The average age of the House is 58, in the Senate 62, which is one of the oldest Congresses United States in history. In commercial sectors, it's not even better. We tell you that currently a lot of the private companies, the CEOs, and those people in the top 1% are often those who are also not the youth. We tell you that history, stop thinking this is not problematic. For that, I'm more to propose in today's debate. To talk about 4 clashes why we win today's debate. First, what is really the status quo and the mechanism of today's debate about? So moving on to the most important question, I would say, is that what are the situation and the status quo of the youth, right? Because side of opposition tells you that the youth are often not the marginalized people. They're not like that marginalized. They're not the social minorities group that we're talking about. We'll give you 3 reasons case that we're talking about. First, we tell you that the youth often have like less speaking role and power in society, right? Because as our first speaker has proven to you, are often like are not so experienced in the work as your side has conceded. So tell you that they just like have less social standing, and is that discrimination on you and the youth are often like more implicit, right? Your side of the house explicitly that the youth are just more inexperienced. They don't really know what they're talking about, and they're more influenced by social coercion and social influences. We think that exactly proves our point. Are just like from themselves and from the social pressure are less likely to have like more, or at least like equal standing to the majority group who are not the youth, right? But then we tell you that the most important stakeholder in today's debate is, yes, the society, but also more importantly, the youth, because they're going to be the ones who are going to live in that society in the future, right? To be the ones who are going to deal with the mess that the current left them with. So moving on to the second clash, which is the most important clash that side opposition wants to deal with, which is the moral principle level. So what is democracy? First of all, what is
POI?
equality, right? Not now. The side opposition is still fond of talking about saying, oh, we're not going to have equal rights on our side of the house. We tell you that is simply not true, because equality doesn't mean exactly the same for every single person. Equality means that you have relatively the same power structure and the same power share. It doesn't mean that everyone has literally the same standing or the same value, because your side of the house starts from a starting point, assuming that the youth and the majority, which are not the youth, have the same starting point. That is simply not the case. We proved to you in all our three speeches, and literally in my like mechanism and status description just now, how the youth are the marginalized group. In order for you to achieve equality and in order for democracy on your side, you need to have mechanism. They basically tell you, oh, like you're going to have like a power on our side of the house, but like exactly the point about uplift minority rights. It's exactly like say, oh, if you uplift minority and these people like are uplifted affirmative policies or like diversities, people are not the same. That's fundamentally not correct. But the second thing they tell you, oh, like the youth are more proxy influences, right? The youth are more likely to be influenced by their parents. We tell you that first, it is washed because it is symmetrical. All people are influenced by social influences, however you like it. But second, we tell you that exactly proves my point, how the youth are discriminated, because people just naturally think when you're young, you don't really understand a lot of things. You're more likely to be like, you know, like inexperienced, not knowing what exactly your ideas are, not knowing what the right decision is. We think that exactly proves our point. We tell you that thirdly, why is so now that I have dismantled their entire moral principle case, let me just move on why the moral principle stands on our side of the house. Because we tell you that in order for you to, because the fundamental goal for democracy is to represent the will of different individuals, right? It is to represent the will of different groups, namely also the minority groups included. We tell you that if the youth is the minority group in this stance, we're going to give them extra weight in order for democracy to work. It is not like saying, oh, like everyone is going to have the same right so that you can have equality on your side of the house. No, because we start from a different starting point where we see that the youth have less share of power in the society. We're going to have primitive actions in order for you to adjust that, in order for democracy to actually kick in, right? I'll take your point.
Are you aware of the difference between equality and equity, and the democracy supports equality over equity?
I am aware how like I challenge side opposition to really engage with the analysis that I just provided you right? We telling you that it is not sufficient for you to simply stand up with like equality and democracy and that sort of stuff and strawman our entire analysis with saying, oh, like people are not going to have the same vote share, because the same vote share doesn't necessarily guarantee equality. It's side opposition who fails to engage with us on that level throughout the entire debate. We tell you that it's exactly the same as uplifting minority rights. It's exactly the same as affirmative stances on our side of the house regarding moral principles. So we tell you that we win the biggest clash, that side opposition wants to engage with us on that level. But thirdly, we tell you that the clash on youth making better decision, right? So I think side opposition just fundamentally doesn't understand our contentions. We first tell you that the youth are more adapted to the current group. It doesn't mean that like, oh, like youth are definitely like more leftist and that is absolutely better. No, that's not what we're trying to say. We're just saying that the youth are more adapted to the current era because they're born in the current era, right? They're born in the era of globalization. They're born in the era where we say that you should actually care about minority rights. You shouldn't be that xenophobic. We tell you that it is it is simply saying that they fit the current era trend. We tell you second that we have like increased resources that lead to like better education and better information for the youth. They basically tell you their only response is to say, well, like not all people have internet access. We tell you that they fail to engage with on their logic with saying that more increased like resources in general for all parts of the world will lead to like increase the education level on our side of the house. That's like simply nonsense and simply like a straw man from their side of the house. But thirdly, we tell you that like young people just generally have like better mindset and they care more about like long-term impacts, right? Because we tell you that a lot of policies need like decades for these to have actual impacts kicking in. Like the people who are not that young just simply do not care. Well, first, they don't care about it that much because like if it takes like several decades, a lot of the people that you're talking about and you're caring about are not going to like root for that. But second, we tell you that the youths are just like more audacious because we're more passionate and we think that it affects us more in the long term. And fourthly, we tell you that the youths are just like more easy to adapt. They're just like more easy to change their mindset, not in the sense that they're more influenced by the social influence, but in the sense that they're more likely to really listen and engage with different opinions, right? Because they have better education and they're more informed and they have like better critical thinking in general. But fourthly, even if you don't buy the above analysis of like why youth have better decision making, we tell you that we still win on a consequentialist level because we get more political involvement on our side of the house. In response to our political apathy, they basically say, oh, like the majority group are also going to have political apathy, but it's just nonsense. It's basically saying like, oh, like the majority group currently already have an advantageous position over the minority group. Somehow they're going to have a political apathy, which is like as important as our side of the house, which I think is totally nonsense. The second, they basically tell you you can have like other mechanisms, but I don't think the mechanisms are A, working empirically fine in the current society, B, like the government is also colluded with like other political sectors, which are also controlled by like the older people, right? So we tell you that why is it important? Because we tell you that consequentially, it also sustains democracy as a social functioning and social institution because the youth are going to care about politics when they participate more. And we tell you that second, it's going to carry out more long-term and more sustainable policies on our side of the house because I have proven to you why it is more principally justified and why it yields a better political involvement on our side of the house. Never been prouder to propose in today's debate. Thank you.
All right, that acknowledges the third proposition speaker. The speaker spoke for 8 minutes and 20 seconds. Now, may I please invite the third opposition speaker to take the floor?
Sorry, 1 second. I'll just set up my timer, and I prefer audible POIs. Thank you. So my speech starts on my first word. Side proposition fails to realize the harms that are so prevalent to the majority of voters on their side of the house, and it's on this basis that we've won this debate today. 2 points at the top of my speech. First, the first two speakers and third speaker on side proposition contradict each other on how heavy the weighting is, and side prop has also based their entire debate around the fact that in the current democratic system, youth are unfairly disadvantaged, but they have failed time and time again to satisfactorily prove to us why this is true. And for that, all their points fall. Furthermore, generally, side prop makes a lot of assumptions and fails to back them up with analysis, simply saying that this is true because it is. But let's take side prop at their best and continue on. So as third speaker on side opposition, I'm going to look at this debate in two main questions. First, who better protects democratic ideals in the political system? And second, who better supports the belief of society? So let's move on to the first question. Who better protects democratic ideals and the political system? So a major clash here is political involvement. We hear from side proposition that political involvement requires youth. They tell us that youth are better for elections and they vote for better policies. Our responses here are, the thing is, that's not exclusive on their side of the house. Youths on our side of the house can be and currently are involved in politics. The only difference is that they're treated like the rest of the population. They're treated equally and they're not prioritized over the majority
Point
of
of information.
No, thank you. They don't prove to you why youth are better for policies. They assume that all youth are progressive and that all elderlies are conservative. And they tell us that conservative policies, like they don't prove to us why conservative policies are inherently worse than progressive policy. And when an entire argument hinges on two major assumptions, it falls. And that is why side proposition has fallen here. So we would argue that side prop is actually decreasing interest in the majority of voters. We cannot allow this to happen due to the fact that young people make up less than half the population, but giving them the weighted
Point of
voting
clarification.
the impression, no thank you, to older voters that their votes matter less. And therefore, we would have the voting numbers of the majority of the population on a decline. The reason we care so much about these comparatively older voters is that the older we get, we are increasingly vulnerable to policy changes, especially in like things like health and livelihood. And when a person's health and livelihood so heavily depend on government assistance and government policies, voting becomes more than mere civic duty. It can have very tangible outcomes on an individual rather than a large scale generalized overall level. The senior vote and the elderly vote in democracies is actually quite diverse, rather to what side proposition actually believes. And overall, it doesn't differ much from the general population. Essentially, when side proposition tries to mitigate the harms to one group of actors, they open a can of worms for all the others. Even if youth are more politically involved, all we see are larger harms to the political system as a whole, because political candidates will begin to pander to younger people rather than focusing on the needs of an entire nation. We'll see a drastic change in the political world. This is counterproductive because a democratic nation, a democratic voting system, relies on the votes from a varied age demographic. We'll see a decrease in the care for the elderly, or a decrease in things like childcare for low-income families, because let's face it, younger generations are more focused on social movements like climate change or things like cancel and call out culture. Politics would suddenly neglect and forget an entire portion of the population, and we believe that this is proven when third speaker on side proposition couldn't answer my partner's POI on why their side of the house engages with equity instead of equality, when equality is the democratic idea. So they also make this point about how youth make better decisions, and they say that they have more progressive mindsets. A few responses to this. First, the first speaker told us that the youth demographic is 18 to 26 and that it's arbitrary, but if you buy their analysis, it's like, and it's arbitrary if you buy their analysis because it's not like the second that youth turn 27, they're unprogressive or uneducated. It's very unclear as to why it's exclusive to 18 to 26-year-olds. And we're also supposed to believe this idea from them that youth make better decisions because it's and first of all, we believe that this whole idea that youth make better decisions is at its core based on nothing more than sweeping generalizations. There are individuals who do not grow up. They also tell us that there are individuals who do not grow up in areas with technology and discussion, but we can't generalize all youth together. And side proposition says multiple times that, youth make better decisions because they just do. They fail to give us a real justification for why it is that youth make better decisions, mainly because there's frankly no metric measure to actually measure this by. And this is why we support everyone having an equal vote on our side, because there's no way to prove that one side has better ideas than the other without subjective bias. And that's why we have opinions, and that's why we have democracy in the first place, so everyone can be equally represented and all ideas can be heard. Secondly, we also don't think that progressive ideologies are inherently better than conservative ones, like side proposition believes, and that's why we have a choice to vote, so people can vote for whatever policies benefit them. An old person may vote conservative, not because their ideas are inherently conservative and because youth are inherently progressive, but because the policies benefit them. Even if we see change in society, and even if we do see change in a faster time frame, side proposition doesn't prove why this is better. We see that faster change equals drastic shifts in how societies work. And the fact is, the majority of the population probably didn't want or ask for drastic change, and they're probably not ready for it. I just don't see the benefits of catering to one small portion of society. So moving on to the second question, who better supports the belief society? The major area of clash here is on how important youth votes are based on educated decision. Side proposition tells us that without a weighted vote, youth cannot make an impact on themselves and the society. Then they tell us that we don't believe youth are smart enough, and they say that because of fluctuating mindsets are the most, and that because of fluctuating mindsets, youth votes are the most important. The thing is, youths can still have the ability to make educated decisions and educated votes on our side of the house. It's not exclusive. And the fact is, even if youths have the ability to make an educated decision, they aren't inherently more progressive. It's not about smartness. It's how their knowledge impacts their vote, how they use their knowledge to make their vote. Even if younger people take the initiative to be more well-informed, the sources that most young people get their news from is pretty unreliable, right? Young people are more likely to look on social media, where the news is often over-exaggerated and inflated compared to reliable news outlets, and a lot of it is hypothetical as well. And side proposition actually stated that the youth are more easily fluctuated, and we see that their fluctuations actually make their votes more unreliable. Sure, I'll take a POI now.
Your second speech has spent half of it basically explaining how our side is generalized. How do you explain that your generalized opinion and how youth are getting their information from social media and therefore unreliable?
Well, the thing is, when we have youth majorities in voting, right, when we have weighted votes for youth, what they see is what they'll vote for, right? But when we have the votes from an entire nation, when we have people who get their news from different sources, we actually have a more reliable vote because it's more equal and it's more, and it actually represents the population. At the end of the day, side opposition takes the win because we fulfill our burdens. We uphold the principle of democracy and we benefit the most amount of actors. Through Edward's points, we have shown you that we uphold the principles of democracy through equal democratic representation. Further, we mitigate voter apathy by keeping older people incentivized to vote because they believe that their votes will actually matter. And through Armand's point regarding the pressure to vote, we explain how our side benefits doing all of this. And because of this, we fulfill our burden of representing the principles of democracy and benefiting the most actors. And for these reasons, so proud to oppose. Thank you.
All right, the House acknowledges the third opposition speaker. The speaker spoke for 8 minutes and 3 seconds. Now, may I please invite the opposition reply? For the reply speech, I'll be indicating at 3 minutes and 4 minutes, all right? Just clarifying.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Thank you. Even if we buy their characterization that youth have a different starting point, they do not understand democracy when they tell you that equity matters more than equality. On this basis alone, we already win this debate. Nevertheless, two themes in the speech for you today that we believe this debate is boiled down to that are the most important themes in this debate. Firstly, individuals. Secondly, society. So let's look at individuals. What do they tell you under this point? Well, they tell you that they want youth to have more political involvement. They tell you that they're going to get more political involvement when youth have more power. How do we respond to this? Well, we told you that basically what happens is you create voter apathy of everyone else. So it's pretty counterintuitive. Even if you're going to give a small portion of the population more involvement, you're going to take it away from everyone else. So buying their analysis, we actually get more harms, even in their best case scenario. But even if you believe that like everyone's still going to believe their vote counts, even if you believe that everyone's still going to think that like, you know, our vote matters, even though youth are worth just as much as everyone else, they didn't actually impact this point. They didn't tell you why it matters. They didn't tell you what's actually going to happen under this. So they didn't actually give us impacts. Even if you buy their analysis and none of the harms, it still doesn't have an impact. Okay, what did we tell you on our side of the house? We told you two things. Firstly, my partner told you about voter apathy. He told you how no one's going to believe their vote matters if like 20% of the population is worth just as much as 80%. It's completely unjustified. It's completely unjust. It's completely immoral and completely undemocratic. They didn't really respond to this very well. All they told you is that, you know, we're prioritizing the wrong group, but they didn't understand that we're not prioritizing any group. We are prioritizing democracy. We are prioritizing equality, not equity. Then they tell you about then we told you about pressure. We told you about how their votes will not be genuine, how their votes can be easily influenced, and how they're not going to be like real votes, but they're going to have a lot more pressure, a lot more responsibility. We don't think that this is right. They never responded to this point. They never even tried to rebut it. They never even tried to take it down. This point still stands. This point is still very relevant in this debate, and they have zero responses to this. So we obviously went on the individuals theme when they barely responded to our points, and we can co-opt all their benefits. Then we move on to the second theme about societies, right? What did they tell you on their side of the house? They gave you 2 points. First, they told you about the justification. They told you how it's justified to give the youth more power because the youth are the ones that are going to be impacted by long-term issues because the youth are like a marginalized group or whatever. So we think that youth are not a marginalized group because they have just as much power in their vote as every other group in society because everyone has one vote. That is the basic principle of democracy that they don't seem to understand. But also, we think that we don't see why people over 26 shouldn't have a voice because we think that they also are impacted by like long-term issues. Just because you're 27 doesn't mean that you're not going to be impacted by any issues in the future. We don't think that this is true at all. But again, even if you buy this, we cannot sacrifice democracy. This debate is placed in democracies, so that is of the utmost importance. Then they tell you about the fixed mindset. They tell you about how youth are better equipped to vote because generally they have progressive beliefs and conservatives and older people are like always conservative. First of all, if you turn 27 doesn't mean you're automatically conservative. That is completely untrue. I already told you how this point is literally just based on generalization, how like old people are not always racist and conservatives are not always bad and like liberals are not always the best. So we think that's completely false, that young people aren't like the best population to vote. And then they tell you that like that youth will be more educated, that youth will have a higher education level. We don't think that this is true at all. We think everyone has education, most people have education, at least in democracies, in these very well-functioning democracies. So we think this whole point basically falls And again, even if you don't buy any of this, democracy is always going to be more important than anything else they tell you. But then what do we tell you on our side? Well, a partner gives you an extremely impactful point about the principle of democracy. And this is what we've been pushing down the bench the entire time, that when you place this debate in a democracy, democracy is always going to be the most important. Power to the people is always going to be the most important. Giving one vote to every person is always going to be the most important, because that is what democracy is. That is what we stand for inside op. That is what they're willing to sacrifice on side prop for no reason whatsoever, except for like some false political involvement idea. So even if we take their side at its best and say that all their analysis is true, we involve youth as well. We give youth a voice in society as well. So we can co-opt all their benefits, but none of their harms to democracy for all these reasons and so many more. So proud to oppose.
All right, that acknowledges the opposition reply. The speaker spoke for 4 minutes and 7 seconds. Now to end the debate, may I please invite the proposition reply.
When being asked why is this so much in our time, Franklin replied that democratic societies give people an illusion that everyone has a choice and a voice to all the problems, but you cannot voice everything because most of your ideas are nonsense. In today's debate, it is crucial to understand what democracy is. It is a representation of an individual. Fancying the right of women and men is not equality. It is simply promoting social justice. Right, look at this. Our opponents try to define equality, and they have this term majority and equality in terms of what? Is it in terms of numbers, or is it in terms of power? Yeah, our team has repeatedly argued that this word equality, similar to equity, is an argument in the terms of power instead of numbers, because I could have a less populated minority group, so should I deserve to not be heard? Look, democracy is fundamentally sued with implicit bias. And why is it? Do we not beg the change in the fundamentals of democracy, but we beg for the change in people and their right to vote? Simply because the stance our opponents take, they lose today's debate. There is no point in having an 80-year-old white judge continue his regime while young children liberists lose their choices when they are young and are not able to choose and decide for the future to live in their life. Now, allow me to identify the clashes made in today's debate. The clashes resolve basically around two things. First, the clashing contentions, where we say that we argue the incentives of being able to vote with youth, and our opponents argue the opposite. Look here, imagine there is this white supremacist who lives in the far right sector for like 40 years. He has a incentive to vote what he wants to vote. For example, for a leader that promotes his own benefits. It does not matter if the other party has a higher amount of vote. He will work for his own incentives. Because of the characterization incentives, our team argues in the second answer speech that there is a swaying stakeholder argument right there, where the fluctuating thoughts on the youth are more likely to result in the fact that they will not vote simply because they don't think they're going to make the change. And that is why we had the weighted votes to the youth in this case, and why we win this clash. Moving on to the second clash, they called that we forgot to refute the faculty's influences. Yeah, our second proposition speaker spends like entire 1 or 2 minutes rebutting influences. Listen here, influences are not the reasons that youth are pressurized to vote. In fact, they are the reasons that they don't vote. Because as our proposition third and second speaker tells you, it is because they are told that young youth are naive, that they are inexperienced, that they don't vote. And it's what we are going against here. So because our opponents just fundamentally don't understand what this clash is about, we win this clash. More so, do they drop our justification by simply saying, no, we have no impact? What is the impact of a moral justification? It's simply to tell you that there is implicit bias and racism, there's xenophobia in this society, and this is what we are willing to change in today's debate. Now, moving on. Listen, we will still, these are the two rules we create, all right? Our opponents create a veil of equality where they cover the true bias in this society, where they simply call, because there are more population, we should listen to them, because there are more, let's say, non-youth people there that we should listen to them, that we generalize the impacts of here we have to them. But we tell you that it is because those people have no influence to change, that you do not make any impacts on their sides because they simply won't change anything, that we win today's debate because it is the youth who are willing to change their thoughts. It is the youth who make a change in today's debate. And for all the impacts we have proven above, we have never been prouder to be propositioned. Thank you.
All right, I'll acknowledge the proposition reply. The speaker spoke for 2 minutes and 48 seconds. With this, we come to the end of the debate. I thank both the teams for a wonderfully contested debate. Please kindly allow us a few minutes to come back with the deliberation. So I'll be stopping the recording right now. Okay, thank you, everyone.